My name's Sam. I am a whatever you want to call me. I started out in horticulture and botany back in high school. Worked on farms, garden centers. I went to college, did not study any of that. Came back to it after the fact, and started working as a grounds manager for college. Well, assistant manager, then grounds manager for college in Quincy. Switched over in 2020 after 8 years of being there to kind of during that time I did native landscaping. I became a tree climber and started doing tree work. So kind of a variety of things. And then started my own business in 2020 in the South Shore, and it's kind of migrated out from there. So currently I'm now in Massachusetts part-time and Pennsylvania part-time. So we cover a lot of area in between. But my sister Kelly back here helps me kind of run things up here in Massachusetts. Feel free at the end of this if you want to come talk to us later. If you got questions, if you need advice, whatever. But we'll try to cover as much. I could probably be here for a really long time talking about this subject because nobody likes dealing with this stuff. So along with raising plants and all that, trees and growth and everything else, I also raised these two young ladies. This is Jamie Mohnkern, my oldest, and this is Beatrice. They both enjoy helping me out in different aspects of the work. James is going to help me present today. So if you got questions and you can't get a hold of me, you can probably grab Jamie or Kelly, or Beatrice will hand you some stickers too if you want. So we'll go ahead and get going. Today we're focusing on invasive species, and I had my graphic, the guy that does my logos and stuff, I had him draw me up this image that I had that was inspired by this tool right here. We had this over at our table. The official name is called a Magna Gresia. It's a foraging farming tool. It's a traditional design that's been modified. For anybody that's had to work with really tough stuff, you really need tough tools. So there's a company out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. They designed these. It's been a game changer for me just in like everyday backyard stuff. If I'm pulling vines, if I'm ripping roots out, got a root cutter on the back and you've got the tines here for prying and pulling. The handle was terrible. It broke the first use we had. Kelly went to throw it in the ground and snapped it right on the spot. So we redid the handle, so if you ever need a new handle, come to us and we'll get you a good one. But we'll talk about this a little bit more later. I had my graphic guy come up with a design that was inspired by this tool. I was like, I need a Grim Reaper type of character, something that, I think he might have had. I think I got my Halloween costume for next year lined up. But when we're dealing with this stuff, all of us probably fall in a different place with plants. We love plants. We hate plants. There's a relationship. Some of us have a hard time cutting things back. Some of us have a hard time not planting too much. You kind of fall somewhere in between. So sometimes we have to look like this guy. We got to be the big bad, ecological justice here. So get yourself one of these tools and journey with us in this ecological justice adventure. What's an invasive species? According to the USDA, we're going to go over this definition, then we're going to talk over some of my working definitions. According to the USDA, it fulfills the following criteria. Is defined under Executive Order 13112. It is a non-native or alien to the ecosystem under the consideration, and a species whose introduction causes or is likely to cause economic harm, environmental harm, or harm to human health. Of course, if it's a USDA definition, there's something in the realm of economics there, so it doesn't always have to, but you can kind of see this at one point may have been a nice planting of looks like yews and arborvitae that is now pretty much just bittersweet. So not quite the original design. Somewhere along the lines, a little bird came in, crapped out a seed, and there you go. You got a whole new landscape there. This is kind of my working definition through my experience and through learning from different, whether it's landscapers or some of my Moseses in the field of ecological landscaping. A non-native or non-functional species, how many are familiar with Doug Tallamy and his work? Rick Dark is his buddy out of University of Delaware, and Rick tends to like expand his definition of natives as a functional species. So if it can function within the ecosystem, and even if it's it may not be a true native, but it may be a regional native, so it may be outside that area, it's not going to be as much of a problem as a plant that's from another part of the world. So I tend to use that a lot, is a non-functional or a non-native species that takes resources and habitat from native or functional species within a given ecosystem. A species that limits or interferes with the potential for greater biodiversity. One of the greatest things you'll learn about native species is the more diversity, the healthier the ecosystem. So that's one of the biggest issues we have with invasive species, is it really cuts down that limited biodiversity. We'll get to that in a little bit. Host species. What is that plant or tree? What is that a host for? Does it basically, if you think about it as a single oak tree, what is that producing food for? What is that producing habitat for? And how does it kind of grow from there? So what kind of plants are you putting on your property that are hosts to other plants, good or bad? So that's something to consider. And then lacking in contributing functionality. This was a project I did back in 2017 where this is, traditional landscaping, probably installed in the 60s, 70s. Few yew shrubs, shape them. At one point in time, there were some bulbs in this bed too, and then somewhat of a lawn down here. That lawn really had too much shade. It was too dry. It never really amounted to much. We redesigned it within a year. This is 2 years after redoing it with shade and woodland natives. And then this is kind of what it looks like now after. This photo kind of looks a little chaotic. It's middle of summer, kind of in between some bloom seasons. So you get that big bloom burst at the beginning of the year, and then some later towards middle, end of summer, you get that second round, third round. And then over 50 native species planted in this bed. The only thing that really remained was the rhododendron and the mountain laurel at the back. But ripping out the yews, putting something in that's more functional.
Okay, so there are lots of different types of invasives, animals and plants, but we're going to be focusing on plant species today. So here are some examples. So what's the big deal with invasives? Why are they a problem? Why should we care? Invasive species contribute to the decline of 42% of the U.S. endangered and threatened species. Invasive species compete with native species for habitat, resources, and space, and that will then decrease biodiversity. The spread of invasive plants threatens wildlife habitat.
Yeah. Along with decrease in biodiversity, it also contributes to this, the spread increases the poor water quality in agricultural lands. You'll see that a lot where, because there's so much turnover of soil and you got bare ground, something's going to jump in it, right? So the invasive species that we struggle with the most around here tend to get in there first. They get established quickly. That's why they're invasive in this area, is because they're really good at dominating the area. So you get a lot of erosion and water quality issues just from either chemical runoff. You'll see that in our watersheds, where you'll have a riparian zone, which is your wetland protection zone, if you think about it. It's the bumpers in your bowling alley for your water quality. If there's nothing growing in that space other than one species, again, your instability on that ground is, I saw an area of the Susquehanna River where they had actually, it was really bad where it was growing on both sides of the river and on the islands. They had dredged and cleared out and redirected the river temporarily to remove the majority of it so that they could then reroute the river back to where it was, just so they could get a handle on the erosion happening there because it was causing issues downstream. Like that's, so yes, it does get economically problematic. But then again, you're dealing with the soil erosion, you're dealing with all those issues. The other, decreased recreational opportunities. How many of you had to deal with Bittersweet forming a wall? Yeah. Try and get through there, you know. Even if you just want to go for a walk in some places, it gets brutal, it gets hard. So even simple stuff. How many of you are familiar with allelopathic plants? How many are familiar with garlic mustard? That's an allelopathic plant. Basically, they release toxins into the ground that make them really good at dominating a space. So not all plants are, so like a garlic mustard can grow side by side with a few, but there's a few others that are limited. Black walnuts are a native tree, but the toxins that the trees give off only allow certain plants. You can't plant, and Jess would probably know more about this from a permaculture standpoint. There's certain trees, fruit trees, vegetables that you can't plant in and around black walnut because of the toxins that it releases. So that's part of the plant's skill at thriving, is that they release these types of things so that they can dominate a given area. We talked about biodiversity creates a stronger system. This is an example of an area I've worked on before where it's this slope that's all Norway maple. There's no herbaceous layer under it. There's no grasses, there's no perennials, there's almost nothing under there due to the shade from the house. This is the one point in the day where it gets a little bit of sun, and you can see its shadows are pretty long, so it's kind of at the end of the day. But there's too much shade for anything else to grow, or a very limited amount of things. And so that overabundance of shade and then the erosion that the roots create just make that situation really difficult. Again, it's a result. If you had sugar maples back there, it would be a different story. The relationship of mycorrhizal activity in the ground that feeds, that stem from the roots of a sugar maple that relate to other plants in that ecosystem causes the area to have more life, more thriving opportunity there. The rivet hypothesis is another hypothesis that you'll hear about in ecosystems where it talks about like the rivets on a plane. You take out a rivet here, you take out a rivet there, you probably still have a plane that flies. Eventually, if you keep taking out rivets, as you do with things in the ecosystem that die off or get kicked out or pushed out, eventually that plane becomes unstable and you're not going to have a plane anymore and you're going to go careening to the ground. So that's another example of how a better biodiversity creates a better system as a whole. Invasive plants are everybody's problem. We all got them. We're all dealing with them. I've known people that are in native landscaping and that have, been doing this and preaching this stuff for a while, and they're battling all at home as well. So it's something we all deal with. This is going to be a quick little example, right? So we've established this is Phragmites over here. Yeah. I was in Connecticut in Bridgeport on the coast one time visiting a friend, and I was blown away that this one part of the coast did not have Phragmites everywhere. So behind this development over here is growing pretty hard. I would imagine the disturbance over time caused it to get in there. It's in the area, but it hadn't completely dominated this landscape. From here going east was all native grasses. It was pretty amazing. And I've never been able to really see a New England coast that hasn't had a dominant Phragmites system. So this was a very precious habitat, rare if you will. Looking at this, you start thinking about, all right, yeah, there's some blue stem grasses, switch grasses, there's a lot of stuff. This was winter, so it's kind of hard to see any other diversity. But there's one niche plant in here. See if anybody can spot it and name it. What was that? I'll give you a hint. It's right around in here. If you get out to the Cape, you might see it. Eastern prickly pear. I've never found it growing in the wild. I've seen it like moved around by human activity, but I've never actually found it growing in the wild. I literally almost stepped on it. So if that Phragmites, when it does move in, if it's not controlled, will eliminate the opportunity for this one niche coastal plant to thrive. So that's what we're kind of like, the preciousness of this space is what we're trying to preserve, which is why the Grim Reaper should show. All right. How do they spread? We're going to go over some quick things on how do they spread, things that we can do to care for that. I also want to keep a track of my time. All right, we're doing good. I'll slow down. At this point, any questions? We good? We're cruising? We got a good sense of what's happening? All right. So we know that let's take the South Shore, right? The South Shore has been logged, from what I understand, the South Shore has been logged at least 4 times, essentially clear cut, 3 to 4 times clear cut. There are forests in Duxbury and kind of out towards Plymouth where you can see a 3rd gen forest, sometimes a 4th gen forest, and most of this was all cut down at one point. So it exposes the land for new things to come in. This was one of the first places we settled, most of us, unless we're homegrown Native Americans. The majority of us probably came in through this part of the Northeast. So do our plants. So this is where all our problems are starting. So it's our responsibility. Logging practices is a big one. There's still logging that happens in the South Shore. There's different types of logging. Where I'm at in Pennsylvania, I see it on different levels. There's clear cutting, there's select logging. Most of us don't have to worry about this, but it is something to consider when you're having companies come in and do work on your property. I do tree work as well, so I can kind of speak to this. Knowing how a company operates in terms of extraction and movement, yes, it's great to have big machines at times. I'll hire cranes to come in and help me pull stuff out, but not the majority of us that own property, that work on property, probably get annoyed when you got contractors that come in, wreak havoc, you're left to clean up the mess. So same thing when it comes to logging practices is my buddy Tim here he ran a business where he did clear cutting for a while. It was destructive, not only to the land, but he also found it destructive to his practices as well. And the competition between companies gets really aggressive. Where Tim found his niche now is in select cutting. In our area, we are dealing with the spongy moth or gypsy moth. We've had like 3 bad years of it in PA. So Tim has noticed that a lot of the older white oaks are now suffering from that. Back to the older oaks are suffering from that. This is a 125-year-old white oak that we took down recently on a property that he was cutting. He's going in looking for specific trees that could be removed that are threatened for long-term demise. I do the same thing here in the South Shore. When I'm consulting somebody on cutting a tree, if it needs to come out, one, what are the reasons for it to come out? Safety is usually first, but does it have ecological value as a dead tree? Sure. There's a lot of uses for dead trees, and I try to advocate for dead trees in the landscape. I'll show you that in a little bit. But the other part is too, I work with a couple people in the South Shore. Does anybody familiar with the North Street Bennett School in Boston, oldest trade school in the U.S.? So I have Kelly works part-time with some contractors through them, and the majority of the time I try to get any of my quality hardwood and lumber, even pine, off to them for preservation carpentry that they're doing throughout the South Shore. They have a mill in Norwell, so I can have it delivered there, and then the cool thing is you get to see this stuff live on again. I had a limb about this big, a white oak off of 400 plus year old white oak tree in Hingham. I think it's the oldest one in Hingham. I haven't seen another tree this old in the South Shore, so it could be the oldest one. But a 400-year-old white oak that had a branch, a branch if you will. This is basically a whole tree itself, about this big. There was a couple weak points in it. If it wasn't cut, it had the potential to fall on the homeowner's house. So we rigged it out of there, but there was still some quality lumber in that. We were able to take that off, and they've recently put it in some of their framing as a truss in some of their carpentry. So it's kind of neat to see this stuff like relive. So thinking about select cutting versus clear cutting, if you're just wiping it out off your land, how can it be reused, and what's happening to that open space? Because then we get into development. Most of us aren't dealing with stuff on this level. Yes?
So we live up in logging land up in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
We just clear cut 13 acres, and we noticed immediately it filled in with Japanese knotweed. So is the issue that it's
Right.
coming in on the equipment, or the birds are spreading the seeds?
Right.
Or what's the issue here?
That's, like you said, it could be equipment. I mean, same thing with like boating recreation. You got to make sure weeds are off your boats when you go in certain water, because that stuff will spread right into the water. So that is a big issue when it comes to some of these larger projects. Anytime you're doing anything bigger, the likelihood of something smaller sneaking by is very high. So some of it may be seeds that were in the area that weren't necessarily, whether I should find out about knotweed. This will be my homework. Through the air? That is true. I'd be curious to know how long the seeds are viable in the seed bank. So that could be something too. If there's a prolonged life. Something like Oriental bittersweet, those seeds, the viability from year to year decreases dramatically if they don't take root the following year. So some things will last in the soil a lot longer, some things won't. Until you create that disturbance, which is kind of what this one is, you won't see stuff happen. This is an area that was clear cut years ago along a bike trail that we frequent, and the pockets that, not clear cut, select cut, because there's still some maturity in that forest. You get these pockets that open up where you're not creating with skidders. That's part of the issue too, is you log out an area, you get these big machines, they're tracking stuff back and forth, a lot of ground opens up. Tim has also done skidding he has a single skidder, so he tries to make it very minimal, but it still opens up pockets for stuff to get in that shouldn't be there. Again, he's not clear cutting, he's select cutting, so it makes it a little easier. Tim has done skidding with horses too. He'll hire Amish, or has hired Amish at times. He used to have a team of horses. They'd haul out that way. He says that's the least intrusive way to do it. So some of these older methods, as much as we want things done and we want that immediate gratification, sometimes slowing down is beneficial. Protect your soil. Kelly's doing her best job right here, but even that's not going to be enough. All right, another way, spreading. So we kind of talked about soil disturbance. We're going to talk about quick the disturbance, whether it's made, and then kind of moving into forest succession. How many of you are familiar with the Far Side cartoon? You may have heard the statement, "No, nature abhors a vacuum," right? So I love this cartoon strip here. The woods were dark and foreboding, and Alice sensed that the sinister eyes were watching her every step. Worst of all, she knew that nature abhorred a vacuum. So you can see all the crows glaring at her. But nothing's meant to stay the way it is. Even in traditional like landscape architect, implementation, you put something in, whether it's you or as a homeowner or a contractor, it doesn't stay that way. It's an ever-changing thing. So one of the strategies that I try to implement is if you have a new area, what direction are we going? What's your planting conditions like? What type of succession are you working with? Are there still trees and shrubs there? What kind of pockets are the most vulnerable? If it's a whole wipe clean, you want to start back over. You got to think of it as like a mini forest fire or something like that. So sometimes doing, again, a little bit is better than trying to do everything all at once, because you're creating less disturbance and less opportunity for other problems to come in. The seed bank, we have a property in Hingham that they lost 7 pine trees in a storm 2 years ago, and what's opened up in the seed bank was just brutal. Like, we had, Kelly, I feel like, had poison ivy all summer last year just because it really gave the poison ivy, which is a native plant, but it gave it plenty of room to run and just made the conditions really difficult. So you get those pockets of sunlight, you got to be ready for something to come in. The other issue with invasive species is that there's a lack of competition from either a bio competition, so whether that's other plants, birds, or insects that would be feasting on our native plants that are kind of controlling the progress of some of our more aggressive plants. Sometimes even fungal activity helps slow the progress. A lot of invasive species don't have that relationship to our fungi, our plants, our birds, so even our browsers. There's certain things that deer will go and eat that you want to keep, and they're not dealing with the problem plants over here. So what gives? It's the lack of adaptability with those and the relationship of that ecosystem with that given plant. So if it doesn't have any competition and it has no control, you've got an invasion on your hands. Jamie, you're up.
Another way that they can spread
Make sure you
is
speak loud too.
By our feathered friends and other wildlife. Before I get into this, I have a challenge for you. Do you think you guys can name each bird and the invasive that they're considering? So let's start with this one.
Raise your hand first too. We don't want to be rude. And be close. You said this one?
Yes.
Not a towhee.
It's not a robin?
Yeah, robin.
Trick question.
I see the coloration though. And what is it eating?
To me, it looks like it's eating winterberry.
Oh, close. Bittersweet. All right, Beatrice, you want to hand it? Beatrice has a prize for those that get the right answer. You got half the answer, so you get a prize. B, this lady in the burgundy over here. I heard you said bittersweet, so you can give one to her. Right here. All right, go ahead.
Let's do this one next.
Cedar waxwing. Do you know what it's eating? What was that? No. This one's kind of a tough one. Calorie or Bradford pear. Doesn't look like a pear, but that's what the fruit looks like.
This one next.
This is probably one you don't see all that often happening. What was that? I heard it. Turkey. Eating. Can you tell what the shrub is? It's in the back.
Burning bush?
Ooh, close.
No.
The berries are.
Purpose?
Yep. Barberry, Japanese barberry. In the hat. All right, the last one. This might be the toughest one. Yeah. If somebody can figure out the berry, you can. Oh yeah, she has. That would be a tough one if you can tell from here. Oh yeah, somebody actually did mention it. I think back here. What did you say earlier? Yeah, yeah. If you know anything about thrushes, they like those thickets, so they'll get into those thickets, and you're eating up berries. All invasive species, but they're native birds. So we're like, oh, I'm feeding my birds and creating a problem in my backyard and for everybody else around me. Go ahead.
Yeah. So even though we love our native birds, with all these invasives, they will spread seeds and droppings, which then cause bigger problems.
Is it just birds?
Not just birds, also other wildlife.
Nursery trade. Hopefully I don't make too many enemies here with Kennedy, but we'll just keep it quiet. I notice I didn't put any pictures of Kennedy up here. My home garden center. The nursery trade's obviously one of the biggest things. If people are going to buy it, they're going to sell it. I make my nurseryman back home I'll sometimes do jobs for him. He had a 36 shrub planting job for me one day. He's like, do you want this one? And I look at the list, 36 burning bush. I was like, Daniel, no, I'm not doing that. I was like, I will not do that. In that part of Pennsylvania, burning bush was still, legally allowed to be sold at nurseries, which there's a lovely plant there. The issue with burning bush is it produces those little berries similar to barberry and then just goes wild in the other places. If you try to pull it up, those root suckers will pop up a new shrub too. So sometimes you think you got it, and then it's showing up over here. But again, we need that balance of, unless a nursery or unless a company is, sometimes we don't know. Sometimes there's just stuff that we're like, oh, we love this plant. And then we find out later it's horrible. You can only know what you know. So this is, I won't come down heavy on you today if you didn't know. But when we do know these things, we should implement that responsibility, self-control. Part of it's just being a good neighbor to those around us. So for the nursery people out there, we need to not be selling certain things. Now, September 19th, 2024, I found out was a great day. I didn't even know this until I looked it up recently when I was going through the Massachusetts list of illegal plants for sale. But the Bradford or Callery pear is finally illegal to sell in commercial sale in Massachusetts. So yes, I'm losing a lot of tree cutting jobs now, because if we just keep cutting them down, I'm obviously losing work. But that's a work I would be glad to lose if I never have to cut down another one, because they don't exist. So yes, you can go on the Massachusetts website and look up invasive plants that are illegal in commercial sale. James, do you want to talk about this one?
Sure. So as we just mentioned, we can sometimes love plants too much and bring them to places that they don't belong and then cause invasiveness.
And yes, I have done that. Part of it too is you go places, especially if you travel, whether it's U.S. or even outside the U.S. You see stuff that you like and you want to recreate it in your own backyard. You want to relive those experiences. Trust me, I get it. They're meaningful, but sometimes certain things are meant to be over there. Other things are meant to be here. The cool thing about I have a customer in Hingham that they were big time travelers in Colorado. They love the Colorado landscape, and so something that I wanted to do for them that we're kind of working on currently is, in the travels that me and my family have done to Colorado, I've taken notice of some of the plants. If I were to bring some of those ones over to here, the ones that aren't native here, it can cause issues and outcompete stuff that needs to be here. Or bring in other, sometimes we're bringing stuff that we can't even see from a microbiology standpoint. So we have quaking aspens. Those trees are native to New England and they're native to Colorado. That's like your typical Colorado fall hillside. You see that. I remember stopping at one of the visitor centers in Rocky Mountain National, and you could see the aspens growing in this clump, and then below it were switchgrass, which we have, bluestem, which we have, and then there were variations of other native wildflowers and wildflowers and shrubs that were native to Colorado that aren't native here, but we have a New England version of it. So sometimes you can do a swap. So like lupin, that's one that there's an eastern lupin and there's a western lupin. The western lupin's really problematic here. The eastern lupin is not found all that well because of the domination of the western. So we can kind of recalibrate our designs by utilizing, I don't need to use a Saskatoon serviceberry. I can use, a New England serviceberry. So sometimes it's just swapping out one thing for the other. And if you're completely lost and overwhelmed in that process, give us a ring. This is my family visiting Kelly in Cambodia, where she did conservation work for 2 years. This is my sister, I think with a Sitka spruce out in Washington. And then this is that 400-year-old oak over in Hingham, right off of 228. My buddy Nate, who does the preservation conference, hugging it because he wants it to stay. He doesn't want to use it. And it's doing very well. It's very healthy. Let's go over some of the most wanteds in Massachusetts we're dealing with. We're probably all familiar with Norway. You can't spit outside and not hit a Norway. They're prolific. Seeds are everywhere. Density of shade, erosion. Again, we talked about a little bit about companion planting and the lack of bacterial activity in the soil that relates to our native plants. So you got a big dominant Norway maple in there. There's no relationship with that mycorrhizal network to the plants that should be growing there. So it does limit what you can plant there at times. I did a job for a customer in Duxbury, and he had a failing Norway maple. His mom was like, keep the trees. He's like, get all the invasives out. So we found an in-between. We built a perch tree. I've done jobs where I've taken failing trees or trees that could be eliminated entirely, strip them out, and he's not too far off the coast in Duxbury. Whether it probably wouldn't be a nest tree for like an osprey or something, but it could be a potential resting spot. In his neighborhood, everybody gets rid of their dead stuff. So he's kind of making a bold stance in his neighborhood of having the only dead tree. So if you drive by and you see that tree, you know which one I'm talking about. But I've done the same thing in Hull, out in the Allerton area where it's kind of on a hill. We were just out there the other day, and I was trimming. Kelly was kind of like pointing things out and had bald eagles fly right up over us. And so, again, if we're over-maintaining our spaces, then we're limiting places for habitat like snags for bigger birds of prey. That eagle looked like he could have used a rest coming out at the wing because he was going through the headwind the whole way. So this customer, though, I did talk to him about doing an eagle nest in there, and we're actually going to reach out to the Audubon Society and see if there's strategies or ways I can get in the tree. I can have one of my other climbers help me get into the tree too, and we can get the equipment up there. But it would be awesome to build, I don't know, what are they, like 300-pound eagle nests, right? Who wouldn't want to see that? So you can also use your plants as structures and other. Again, a dying tree, owls, woodpeckers, insects, create a bird feeder. There it is, our favorite, Calorie pear. You may have this growing on your property. You may have planted them. I've planted them. I wish I would have gone back and cut them down after I did. But this is what we are going for. We're going for that white flower aesthetic. There's other plants here that do just as good a job and benefit us a whole lot better. It fills in areas, so that cedar waxwing, when him and his buddies go and ravage that tree in late winter when there's a lack of other insects to eat, and they're consuming a lot of berries at the time, they go out to these disturbed areas, and then we have whole forests of calorie pear growing where it shouldn't be, at least in this continent. And then this is my buddy Zach. We stripped out these ones had grown pretty close to that house. They were causing a lot of moisture up against the soffit and the dormer there. So what we did was we took out that tree. We're replacing it with a Carpinus caroliniana, American hop hornbeam, or American hornbeam, sorry. So we're doing a swap of get rid of the invasive and put something else there that would function in the space a little better. Tree of heaven. This one, it's crazy. It's everywhere. If you haven't dealt with it, it looks a lot like our native sumacs, so be careful when identifying and nixing something. Make sure you're identifying the right thing. Sumacs, they can be a bit weedy. They have their own space. You don't necessarily need to go plant them. They'll find a way to get into where they need to be. But they do offer a lot of benefit, and they're fun to kind of landscape around if you do have them. So if you need guidance there, we can help you. Tree of Heaven's also the host plant for the ever-encroaching invasive spotted lanternfly. There we go. This was a picture I took in September where they were just, you can see how the bark's a little black. That's all the excrement, basically, the sugary excrement from the flies on that tree, and they're just covered. You know, they'll hit our maples hard. They'll get here eventually. So just keep an eye out for them. Buckthorn, that's another one we deal with a lot. You probably ran into it and pulled out a 3-inch needle out of your arm. They're pretty aggressive. There's glossy and there's common buckthorn. Usually you can tell by the orange wood on the inside. We've got multiple shrubs that are, these are the kind of highlights. Again, I can have this presentation available if people want to come back and reference it, but a lot of this information is already on the Audubon invasive species website, so I'm just trying to deal with the ones we focus with the most. You've got burning bush. We love the looks. A great alternative would be anything from aronia to, which is chokeberry, native shrub, beautiful shrubs, to serviceberry, which is probably one of my top. Depending on color, burning bush may outperform it in fall color, but I've got other things too. We can.
Sorry, could you just say the ones you like?
Serviceberry, yep. And then chokeberry too. They're a little bit smaller, both edible.
Serviceberry comes as a bush as well as a tree?
Yeah. So lavis will tend to grow more. Amelanchier or lavis tends to grow. It's a smooth. Serviceberry tends to grow more upright, and you can help it to grow more upright. Appalachian, I think they call it too, serviceberry. And then the eastern, or the arborea, Amelanchier arborea. I sometimes will use cultivars like Autumn Brilliance. Those will grow more shrub-like, multi-stemmed, so you can get some variety there. Bush honeysuckle, Japanese barberry. This is the one where Kelly broke the handle. Autumn olive, and then if anybody's had to walk into a multiflora rose, you know it just looks like chaos. So these are some of the big ones that we're dealing with. Some of the other shrubs, the privet, we all like nice clean lines. Privet is awful. It's most of the time we kind of trim it so it doesn't get flowers and berries, but inevitably it's going to have flowers and berries. These are the berries, a little black, matte finish kind of to them, dark blue. This is more of what happens to them when you don't do anything to them and they turn into these giant weed patches, and then you get every other shrub and tree grown in there as well. This was a project we did where an ecology lab, we ripped out a failing, ugly privet hedge, and we implemented a wildflower bed that this is 2 years after its implementation, and most of it was all plugs. We planted with smaller plugs. So with a little bit of water the first couple years, the biodiversity was a lot better than privet. I think it looks better. And then Rose of Sharon. It's not technically an invasive. We all love the look. It's one of those plants that I would say it's not invasive in terms of state regulations, but just watch it. It does have a tendency to turn into this, and This is one where somebody had planted it, a couple of them on their property, and on their neighbor's side of the property, it just turned into a monoculture of Rosa Sharon. So keep an eye on its movement and where the seeds get cast. It can be problematic. Yes, it does feed bees, but there's plenty of other things that feed bees. We have native hibiscus, which is part of the hibiscus family, so we could even be planting that. There it is. Herbaceous plants and vines. We've got English ivy. English ivy is actually not even on the state list for invasive species, but I would consider it because it'll not only kill your trees and choke out your trees, because we like how it trellises, but it'll choke them out. But it creates a carpet that just is impenetrable. Phragmites, you probably have seen this traveling up and down Route 3. That's looking westward off of Route 3. I love that bridge view, but it's almost all Phragmites. There's no native grasses out there. Well, very few. Japanese honeysuckle vine, garlic mustard, Japanese knotweed. James, do you want to talk about black swallowwort a little bit?
Sure. So this is, you can see the seed pods look very similar to milkweed. This can not only trick us, it can trick monarchs. And they think they're laying their eggs on milkweed, but once those caterpillars hatch, then they can't eat that and they will die. So it affects monarchs a lot because milkweeds are main host for monarchs, and this is not.
Again, it's a adaptation relationship. They haven't adapted and learned to adapt to black swallowwort, and so it puts off all the signals that it's a milkweed plant, which is part of the family, but it doesn't operate under the same.
Can you tell us how to best dispose of that? And when to dispose of it?
Oh, so I've had customers try carb starving it. So you basically, in late summer when it's wanting to go into the pod stage after the bloom, is when it's trying to put all that energy into creating blossoms. Cutting it down would do a number. If it's in beds and if it's interweaving because it's more of a vine and if it's wrapped around stuff, you almost have to pull stuff out. There's almost no way. You might be able to do like a minor topical treatment on it consistently with chemical. But most of us are not wanting to deal with the chemicals, but sometimes doing limited applications does help. If you can do a cover kill where you put down some type of heavy tarp or even like old billboard panels, you can get those pretty cheap. They're UV resistant, so you could do a cover kill for like a season. I've wiped it out that way. Sometimes it's just tedious. Sometimes just getting in the soil. The nice thing is it's easy to find the roots. So it depends on how bad your invasion is. But that's a tough one to deal with. But we can talk about other ideas too. What's next? All right. I'm tired of talking about the bad stuff. Let's talk about the good stuff. So once we get into like the removal portion of it, we kind of talked about multiple ways here. Muscle. Sometimes you just got to get after it with muscle. It can be overwhelming. If it's not your thing, find those of us that get passionate about it, and maybe we'll all get out there together and just wipe some invasives out. Smother kill. This is one I've done where this was mostly daylily, and we laid down a tarp fabric and killed off a large section, and then we'll move that over. We'll replant that section. Instead of doing it all at once and kind of overwhelming the homeowner, we did limited spots. And so kill off everything that's there and then moved into the next section. There's also English ivy that was under there, some bittersweet, variety of things. So get it all at once. There was some beneficial stuff I tried to pull out, some asters and stuff. But for the most part, wipe it all out, move on to the next section, replant it. Chemicals. I used to have my pesticide license. I don't really want to be doing much in the realm of pesticide applications. There's plenty of people doing that. but that's always a good option too, especially with knotweed. Places like Natural Tree out of Stoughton do systemic injections, which are really successful. I definitely recommend them. You may pay a little bit more up front, but at least it's done. It'll beat having to come back to it and fight it year after year and getting into other things. Carb starving we talked about, where you pick the right time where it's at the max of it's trying to put out new life in seed form, cutting it down, and you can even outcompete things sometimes just by consistent cutting and allowing something in the area to thrive. You can sometimes outcompete. Really depends on what you're trying to outcompete though. Like bittersweet isn't one of those ones you can cut down. Say you have these flowers and grasses over here and this bittersweet keeps coming back, you probably need to pull the bittersweet. All right. And then we're almost done. We kind of talked about identify your areas. Don't do too much if it's overwhelming. Focus on one area, your biggest areas of impact, and deal with what you can at a time. I do what I call a Houdini swap, where there was barberry back here, and I planted a 9-bark behind it in its place. So they really like the look of the barberry, but there's a 9-bark that looks very similar that would be even more beneficial. This was a hosta bed that we converted into a wildflower bed, and we would just take out chunks of hosta and throw something in its place. And then later we'd revisit, take out another chunk of hosta, put something in its place. So find a use. Mulch. Ramial mulch. If you want to come talk to me about mulch later, this is a great one to be on the lookout for, is putting the good nutrients back in the soil that we need. Norway maple makes great lumber and firewood. So come talk to me about that. And then fencing. You can create habitat by creating wattles or fencing with your brush. And then last but not least, food. We like to eat and harvest garlic mustard. You can tap your Norway maple trees. You can use them as hugelculture beds, where you take the material, you put it underground, throw your soil back on top, and you've got a nutrient bank there for years to come. Here's your resources. Come talk to us. Thank you.